I think there's truth in both of those things. I mean, I think Max is right. Eventually, sooner or later, the logic of having a relationship with China and the lunacy of not having a relationship with China would have sort of hit critical mass anyway. But, you know, I've kind of been living and breathing this stuff for a long time. And I think, you know, Nixon and Kissinger do deserve credit for sort of sussing out that there was a moment and then actually acting on it. And Nixon's calculation was that only a guy like Nixon could do this. And interestingly, I interviewed Morley Safer of 60 Minutes for another episode, which actually will precede this one. And he talks about having lunch with Nixon in Hong Kong in 1967 and asking Nixon, or wanting to ask Nixon about Vietnam, and Nixon saying, Vietnam's not important, it's a sideshow. China's what's really important.
And he wrote an article,
in Foreign Affairs about it. So he had been thinking this for a long time, but what Nixon said to Safer was the only person who can do an opening to China politically in the States would be a Republican president, because he was the one who had credibility with the people who were against it. If a Democrat had been doing it, Nixon would have been the first one to sort of get on the bandwagon and bait them for betraying Taiwan and so on. So he was able politically to do it and to sell it to a lot, not all, but a lot of the skeptics on the right by saying, well, this is our great step to counter the Soviet Union and bring the Chinese in on our side, and therefore if we have to do certain things. So you have to give them credit. You say Nixon comes, I mean, I'm a product of the 1960s, the anti-war movement, and I was not exactly a fan of Nixon growing up. But he's an extremely complicated figure who had great insights and pulled this off and was simultaneously, you know, the most petty, vindictive, conspiratorial, all these things, and Kissinger the same way. And you know, when you look at the transcripts and the fear they had of losing control and so on, it's almost like a complete split personality of these guys. Did this amazing thing with this other side of it that was not nearly so attractive.
I had two dominant impressions. One was, especially driving through the countryside, what a poor country this was. We knew that it was, you know, massively populated, but I had no idea of the primitive nature of the agriculture that we witnessed as a bus was speeding through the countryside.
You were seeing the best of it.
And that's right. But even more vivid in my mind, because of the poverty, was going through Beijing on my own where possible. And mind you, I had spent 3 years in the Soviet Union, and I'd seen a great communist country and how it functioned, and the terrible shortages and the sloppiness of life in Moscow as I had experienced it. And here, going around Beijing, the store that was selling multicolored ping pong balls, magnificently arranged in a retail fashion that you could never have seen in Moscow. Somebody else, another store, had crayons and drawing paper and a few primitive art supplies. But the pride of display, not done for us, but this was in the normal run of things. In the department store, the efficiency with which the sales slips were, with a clothespin, were passed on a string down to the cashier, and they would come back promptly, and everything worked functionally. And I knew, of course, that Chinese people elsewhere, especially in the United States, but also in Indonesia and throughout Asia, when turned loose in an entrepreneurial fashion, had enormous creativity and work ethic, which I never saw in the Soviet Union. And I remember saying to somebody, if these people are ever turned loose, watch out.
You and Napoleon.
I and Napoleon, right.
I think Nixon would have been astonished. None of us had a clue that China was going to develop economically so rapidly, or that economic and people-to-people relationships between the U.S. and China were going to play such an important role. in our overall relationship now, or grow to such a gigantic size. He was interested in the trilateral diplomacy and in trying to put the Soviets off balance, get them to be more responsive to his policies, his desire to get out of Vietnam, his arms control arrangements and so forth. But after the Soviet Union collapsed and so forth, and Tiananmen occurred, the relationship had to survive these great blows to the relationship, and did so on the basis of the people-to-people contacts to which he and Nixon relegated to the State Department. Anyway, I think he would have been astonished at the size of the relationship and quite delighted with the role that he played in starting it all.